This is In for a Penny, A Love Story's Beginnings by Lesley Atherton. Chapter 1, Danny. I think I'll have the calamari to start and then I'll go for the steak and chips. Classic. You can't go wrong with steak and chips. The date had gone reasonably well till that point. Danielle and Sean had met an hour earlier at Modigliani's wine bar and they had bought a round each. She'd opted for her usual light and fruity white and he'd gone for the Cabernet Sauvignon. Their second round copied the first, and Danielle shivered at the look of Sean's glass. Very bloody, she said, and he gave her a vampiric sneer in return. She'd almost giggled, then pulled herself back. She hardly knew him after all. Sean's shirt strained with the challenge of enclosing his incredibly muscular frame. He wasn't kidding when he had messaged her about spending an hour each day in his home gym. The name He-Man kept coming to Danielle's mind. Large muscles and shoulder-length wavy blonde hair. One of the many reasons he'd been a swipe right. Sean also talked one hell of a lot, and Danielle had barely been able to get a word in, but she knew from the experiences of her friends that this wasn't unusual. Many people felt more shy and self-conscious than they initially seemed on the dating app, and overcompensation was common. They tried to make themselves more exciting and fun than any human being could ever realistically be. In Danielle's limited experience, such madness was fairly temporary, and the guy would soon settle without ever being aware of how much of a pain he'd been. It was then that he'd begin talking about things other than himself, like maybe asking questions about her. Things hadn't gone overly well on previous dates, though. There had been Elliot, a doctoral research student in the field of medical ethics. He'd triple-timed her, so likely left all his ethics in the classroom. He'd been pretty, though, pretty gorgeous. Unlike Vinny, who was pretty terrible. He said, "I'm an environmental activist and campaigner," but he bought 2 plastic bottles of water on their date, ate only junk food, and worst of all, she discovered the details of his campaigning. He was an environmental denialist. A man who drove the most ungreen car. Oh yes, he was a campaigner, but on the right-wing other side. That date had lasted only 45 minutes. Oh, and Paul, who'd claimed to be 29, but who looked more like a fraught 39. He'd been a sweetheart, but looked and acted more like Danielle's dad, so that went nowhere too. During the week of online chatting with Sean, they'd discussed future dates, and Danielle had suggested they should eat at Ilastria, a fusion tapas bar with an incredible and diverse menu. Danielle had eaten there many times before and was always keen to give it another try to get better acquainted with their offerings. But Sean's response had been a little less enthusiastic. "Oh, no, not there," he said. "Let's do the Harvest home. It's easy and quick and not pretentious." It didn't necessarily mean something, but it might. So they'd been to Modigliani's for a drink. They'd loosened up and enjoyed each other's company, and then had ended up at the Harvest home, which was, in Danielle's eyes, the purveyor of the world's most banal menu. "I think I'll have calamari for a starter, then pig out on a medium rare steak, baked potato, not fries, salad. It's a balancing act between the stuff that's nice and the stuff you should eat." Danielle stared down at the menu. "But I thought," she said. "Thought what?" he asked, distractedly taking a glance at the dessert options. I think I'll go for a mud pie if I have room. What about you? Do you like desserts?" Yeah, sometimes. Sorry, I thought you were vegetarian. I only wanted to meet vegetarians. That's why I put VG only on my profile. You know, VG. Sean shrugged. It means vegan or vegetarian. You're about to eat calamari and steak, and I'm not sure I could deal with that. VG. I never knew. I thought it meant very good. Geez, that explains a lot. I've contacted a few other women in the past and got loads of abuse when I mentioned what I had for dinner. Yeah, well, that would make some sense. Sean coughed quietly and his He-Man blonde hair bounced forward over his cheeks. He pushed his hair back with both hands and rubbed his eyes slowly. "I don't know what to do now," Sean mumbled. "What do you mean?" "Well, I really like you, but I know you aren't going to approve of me eating meat, and I do eat meat, so there's no point in being here, is there?" Danielle sighed, her heart hurting just a little with the injustice of it all. She'd rarely been so attracted to a man. Was the vegan thing really such a big deal? Actually, yes, it was. You're right, it is a deal breaker. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. That doesn't mean we can't enjoy the rest of our night and leave it at that. How does that sound? Sounds good, Danielle. Tell you what, give me a few hints about what a vegan would eat and I'll do you the honour of eating veggie tonight. You won't convert me or anything, but everyone says we should all be eating more plants. That's for sure. Poor plants, said Sean, and they nodded at each other with awkward smiles. So, go on, said Sean, what should I have? Danielle had already scanned the uninspiring menu. There isn't much, to be honest. Now I know why you suggested Alastria. Shall we go back there? She nodded with enthusiasm, already excited to try the new Greek aubergine. Let's do it. Once in Alastria, Sean scanned the menu. It's like a foreign language, he admitted. Danielle patted his arm. I'll give you a hand, okay? In her comfort zone now, Danielle relaxed and asked, What do you like? I usually have calamari, then steak and chips. Or potato if I'm feeling well behaved. I'm a traditionalist. The meat's good for muscle mass, you know. You sure are a traditionalist, and you do seem to have a lot of muscle mass. OK then, we could keep on with the chip theme, and maybe you could have potato wedges. The wedges here are really good. They're flavoured with salt, black pepper and a sprinkling of dried kelp. What's kelp? Seaweed. It's traditional, you know. Sean raised his eyebrows and spluttered. He pursed his lips and nodded slowly. OK, so weird, wedges. What else? Danielle scanned the menu and pouted. How are you with beans? I like the ones in tins, in tomato sauce, on a cooked breakfast, sorry. Try another kind then. How about these cannellini burgers? Cannellini, isn't that pasta? That's cannelloni. No, cannellini are like white kidney beans. These burgers are fantastic and come on a special rosemary sourdough bread with a large side salad. The best bit is the pickled cabbage. Oh, and I love what they do with coriander. They mince it and add it to the bread, so it's like garlic bread with parsley. It's delicious. Will it be filling enough, you know, for a person who likes ordinary food? It'll be just fine. It's tasty, easy to eat, and can't possibly do you any harm. Shall I order? Sean nodded and whispered the words, Yes, thank you. Chapter 2, Sean. Well, that had been interesting and surprising. Danielle was a real looker and much more funny than he thought she would be once he found out she was a veggie weirdo. She was just his physical type too, beautiful and strong-looking with clear, pale skin and a wide smile. Just the kind of girl who he hoped would infect him with her lust for life. She could have been She-Ra with her hair, those legs and those high boots. Wow. As was his usual morning habit, Sean peered at his reflection in the large hall mirror. You know what, he said to his image, I think those plants did me good. He turned his head from side to side and it was obvious that his skin had an unaccustomed healthy glow. But he wasn't stupid. His healthy sheen could also be due to the, albeit temporary, affections of a gorgeous princess of power. Yes, it might just be that. Sean grinned again at his reflection and smoothed back his hair. Just like He-Man, he said, as he opened his door and left the house. It wasn't a long walk to work, and today he was grateful for it, just as he was every other morning after day. It was odd, though. He'd drunk a lot less than he would on a night with the lads, but felt more out of it than usual. It was as if he was walking on air. Perhaps it was the bean sprouts, he wondered, and considered buying a smoothie for breakfast. As he turned a corner and the sun shone over the office blocks to his right, he fished his phone from his pocket and sent Danielle a quick text. Feeling amazing today, thanks for the food advice. Kiss. Almost immediately she responded, Delish, wasn't it? Kiss. No, you're amazing, or let's do it again. Had he screwed up? Had that been their one fun night? Sod the smoothie. He called in at Alan's cafe. Usual, Sean, called Alan. Yeah, just one sausage today, though, and give me an extra egg instead. Oh, said Alan. Fancy. And double up on the cooked tomatoes and mushrooms. Chapter 3, Danielle. Well, that had been interesting and surprising too. Sean was as lovely in person as he'd seemed online. He was gorgeous too, with his dark blonde hair and twinkling eyes. Basically, he was just the kind of man who might just help her recover her broken self-belief. His feeling amazing text had been timely, having arrived just as she was considering how to progress. When he talked to her about his sporting life, rugby and weights now and hockey when he'd been younger, she'd been interested, and his work as a woodcarver was fascinating too. The photos he'd shown her of his creations were truly out of this world. She didn't share his sporting interests or his obsession with transformational wood, but his personality had totally drawn her in. Oh, and they both enjoyed the same TV series, so that was something. Anyway, who said that a couple needed to be the same and needed to share their interests? There's no rule. Opposites attract, right? Couple. Why was she thinking of him as the other half of her couple? Danielle sighed as she left the tube station and took the final leg of her journey to work. She remembered his insights and his easy conversation. She blushed while remembering how his earlobes looked like plump pink caterpillars. I could fall for him, she thought, but he's just so carnivorous. Her foot kicked against a slightly skewed paving stone, and she remembered how Sean's thighs were so firm and powerful. Hey, Danny, how'd it go? Danielle's workmate, Rach, had sneaked up behind her at the crossing light, and Danielle turned back and grinned. He was amazing. Oh, so when are you seeing him again? I'm not. He's a carnivore. So? I can't have a meat eater. I just can't. Rach shook her head and poked her friend in the upper arm. She did it so hard that Danielle felt it through her coat. You can, Danny, insisted Rach, if he's a good guy and if his profile picture was accurate. It was, said Danielle. He was amazing. She'd assumed that she would never again be in a relationship with a carnivore. But Sean was a good guy, perhaps even a very good guy, VG, and he had already compromised for her sake, perhaps for his sake too. He'd seemed to enjoy eating their dinner, and he commented positively on most of the foods he'd eaten. Danielle had adored her Greek aubergine, a stuffed with pine nuts delight, and Sean had almost finished his bean burger, though all the options he'd selected, just to try things out, had meant he'd ended up with an expensive and massive portion of food. There was certainly a small part of Danielle that wondered what right she had to make a demand upon anyone, least of all a man who was independent, clearly industrious and successful. Most of all a man who was also easy to please and who was keen to please back. Damn him. Confused, Danielle arrived at her office desk and sighed loudly. Wasn't it lunchtime yet? Surely her falafel was calling her. She checked her phone. 9:14 a.m. She was 16 minutes early, and it definitely wasn't lunchtime. Danielle's stomach churned, and she moved to investigate ways round it. The snack machine next to the lifts was no help. Danielle scanned their selection and reluctantly chose a packet of plain crisps. They couldn't possibly be trouble. Damn it, the dark chocolate peppermint cream she'd asked the snack team to keep in stock were sold out. Why the hell couldn't the non-veggies keep their hands off what was rightfully hers? And why hadn't Sean got back to her, telling her he couldn't live without her? Yep, she had it bad. Bad enough to betray her principles? Yes, very likely. Danielle returned to her desk with the most boring of crisps and sneaked her mobile phone from her drawer. Hey, Sean, she typed. I'm still veggie, but can we see each other again tonight? Kiss. His reply arrived with speed. I'm still meaty, but my answer has to be, of course. Kiss. Danielle traced over the words of course and the simple kiss he'd sent. Yes, it was the right thing to have done. And to celebrate, Danielle returned to the snack machine and chose the snack she really wanted, not just the one that she allowed herself. She grinned and blushed as she thought again of her text and returned to her desk, already tearing the wrapper from the milk chocolate celebrations she planned to dip in milky coffee at her desk. In for a penny, in for a pound. That was In for a Penny, a short story by Lesley Atherton.